So I'm Rob Bierregaard. A lot of you know me from the chat and my Osprey website with migration work. Quite a few of you have been up and spent the week with me at Hog Island at the Rapture Camp. I've been studying Ospreys since 1971, and where I've started banding nestlings on Martha's Vineyard. I've been tracking ospreys with satellite telemetry since about the year 2000. Hang on a sec, I got to turn my volume down here. Okay, I was getting some feedback there that was confusing. So I've got a whole bunch of questions here. They're excellent questions. I'm not going to be able to get through all of them, but I will answer the ones that I don't get to in our hour here. I'll answer them just in text, and then my answers will be posted somewhere on the website. So not surprisingly, the first set of questions are all focused on the great horned owl attacks that have been happening for a week or so. As a little bit of a forward, this is all really unprecedented stuff. We Osprey researchers have never seen this happen because we've never had, until the last 10 years or so, we've never had cameras with infrared lights on them. So we were never able to tell what was going on with ospreys at osprey nests during the middle of the night. So this is all new stuff, and some of you have seen more osprey behavior with great horned owls than most of the osprey so-called experts have. So what might explain the osprey's ongoing attacks in spite of Rachel's defense of the nest? Wouldn't small mammalian prey be easier for the great horned owl? Certainly they would, but great horned owls don't seem to care about easy or not. They are probably the most ferocious bird of prey in North America. Over in Europe, there's the Eurasian eagle owl, which is even bigger and scarier. So I'm going to assume we're live again, and continue with I was talking about the great horned owl attacks, and there's certainly a great reward in terms of the bang for the attack in terms of how much food the owl would get. So it seems the owl seems to be willing to take on Rachel in order to get another meal. Is there anything unique or unusual about the way in which Rachel has been trying to thwart the great horned owl attacks? Well, we have no way to answer that question because we've never seen this before. So this is all news to us, and so we don't know. This may be what most ospreys do when they're faced with this. I have seen other attacks at other nests in the past. I've never seen, only a few, and I've never seen a female attack or defend the nest the way Rachel has been. The incident on I think the second attack when Rachel seemed to be attacking Bailey, why was she so aggressive? Why did she attack Bailey? Again, that's hard to say. I think she was just so riled up that she was attacking anything in the nest. And remember that ospreys aren't as rational beings, as rational as we are. So I think she had a complete sensory overload and was attacking anything that was moving in the nest. And fortunately, it looked like she came close to accidentally pushing Bailey out of the nest, which would have been really the ultimate irony. So unfortunately, that didn't happen. Has Rachel adapted since the owl attacks? She seems to have. She seems to be perching closer to the nest, not as far out on her perch at night. Is this learned behavior we're likely to see again next season? Certainly could be. Could Rachel's adaptation to the owl attacks have been accelerated by her experience with losing chicks to eagle predation over the last 2 years? I don't think so. I think that's really sort of two very different events. The daytime attacks were with the eagles and the nighttime attacks with the owls. Will Bailey be a more alert and defensive predator as a result of observing Rachel's defensive behavior? Will she be more likely to avoid great horned owl territories when she migrates? The first question, I don't think so. I don't think she'll be any more alert and defensive after watching what her mother has done. I don't think Osprey's... Okay, looks like I'm back. Sorry for this again. This is probably more frustrating for us than it is for you. Talking about great horned owls, again, continuing that conversation. I was saying that we've lost some adults probably to great horned owls as they're migrating, but there's no way that Bailey could tell whether a woodlot that she lands in has a great horned owl in it or not. And even if it does, it's really a crapshoot as to whether a great horned owl would find her and decide to take on an adult. There's been some questions about why Steve isn't defending the nest at night or responding to Rachel's alarm calls, especially given that other male ospreys do stay near their nests. Is there a nighttime behavior for male ospreys that is considered standard? We have no idea what nighttime behavior is for male ospreys, since they're almost always away from the nest, and they could be a long way from the nest. So we don't know what's standard. Steve could be all the way across. It's probably across the bay, and so he can't see what's going on. So it's not his fault that he's not there standing up to the owls with Rachel. Someone wants to know if I think that Rachel and Steve created a decoy osprey following the attack, or is that wishful thinking on our part? I would definitely say that's wishful thinking. And it appears that she brought moss to shield or cover Bailey. Is that typical behavior? First of all, I'm not sure it was actually trying to defend or cover Bailey. And again, we don't know what typical behavior is, so I can't answer that question. Is this year's great horned owl a young bird? No way to tell. Certainly could be a young bird that's dispersing from its nest. Great horned owl looks like she looks like a normal young osprey now at age 6.5 weeks or so. I think that's about what she is. Okay, the next set of questions are about Bailey's wing and what's the status. Do we know what caused it and what is the nature of the injury? I've been watching this afternoon, and the right wing looks a little droopy. Oops. We seem to have, I think we might have lost me a little bit. So I'll back up. Talking about Bailey's wing, it looks a little droopy to me. It's certainly not broken. What caused it is almost certainly something happening with the great horned owl attack. At least once the owl actually had its feet and talons on or into Bailey. So there might be a puncture wound in there somewhere. But ospreys recover from all sorts of injuries. I think Bailey will be okay, but it's impossible, really impossible to tell. Will the injury affect Bailey when she fledges? We'll be able to tell that in a week or so as Bailey begins to do her little helicoptering and exercise the wings. We'll be able to see what's going on. Rachel will certainly not leave before... Question is there a chance that Rachel might leave before Bailey fledges? Almost certainly not. Rachel may leave not long after Bailey fledges, but the females almost always stay around until the young have fledged and have been out on their own for a week or so, maybe a couple of weeks. Typically, females head south on their migration in the middle of August. And so I would guess that Rachel would leave sometime in the third or fourth week in August, but certainly not before Bailey fledges. If Bailey's still injured when she fledges, will she be more vulnerable because she is alone or less vulnerable because she can fly? She'll certainly be less vulnerable to the owl because she won't be in the nest and sort of a sitting target the way she is now, if she can't fly very well, then there are other issues about her hunting, and that is really impossible to predict right now. Is there a point at which you will intervene? And you, I guess, means the Hog Island gang. This is under discussion. I think we're, well, it's not really under discussion. The standard procedure is no intervention in, unless there's something that's clearly human induced, as if Rachel or Steve brought in some plastic bags or fishing line and the young got tangled in that. Certainly that would be a reason for intervention. If Bailey can't fly and tries to fledge and winds up on the ground somewhere where she can be captured, I'm sure that we would take her to a rehab center somewhere. As long as she's capable of flying, we're going to let nature run its course here and not intervene with under these circumstances. Why did Bailey not receive a Darvik band? That's a color band. That was simply a question of logistics. The team that came to band Bailey from the Biodiversity Research Institute didn't have enough snap rivets for 2 bands, so they only were able to band one of the 2 young, color band, one of the 2 young, and unfortunately it was the bird that was color banded was the one that the owl caught. And so that was simply just a logistical issue. Okay, looks like we're back online. So we're talking about Bailey's wing, and just as I dropped offline, I was watching Bailey on the feed, and looked like she was putting out that right wing pretty well. So I think it's going to be okay, but again, it's something that we really can't predict. So now some general questions on ospreys and the cam. When ospreys are migrating, they fly during the night occasionally, and that happens when they're going out over the water. Very rarely do ospreys migrate over land at night when they're over land. But when they go out over the Caribbean from Hispaniola to South America, that takes more than 12 hours, so they're always flying at night. A lot of ospreys go down the east coast, will get to the Outer Banks of North Carolina, and from there they will go over about 500 miles of open water from North Carolina to Florida, and that's about 20 hours of flight. They fly about 25 miles an hour when they're migrating. So of necessity they fly at night when they're out over open water. They can't land on the water and rest like a duck or gull do. So they do fly at night, and this question is about the person has seen at least 4 occasions when ospreys caught fish during the night, even during a new moon. Can you tell us more about their night vision? Well, apparently they have some. No one has tested ospreys' night vision, so what we know really is based on what we learn from birds that are migrating at night. It's not too surprising out over the ocean, and even it's never pitch black dark out over the ocean. Birds catching fish even during a new moon is pretty remarkable. Again, there's a lot of information that we're getting from osprey nest cams that we had no idea about before this technology came on the scene. You all know about as much as about osprey's night vision as I do now, based on the observations that they actually do catch some fish at night. This season at 4 different nests in different locations, there were 12 eggs laid between the 4 nests, 11 were viable, and now only 2 chicks remain. Is this typical, or is the survival rate lower than normal? If it's lower, what might explain that? So that's lower than we would expect. Typically in a colony of ospreys, if the average number of young raised in a colony is a little bit over 1, that's pretty good. If we get up to 1.5 per young per active nest, nests that had eggs in them, that's quite good. In super years, you might get an average of close to 2 young per nest, but that's really unusual. So if we had 4 nests, typically we would expect, let's say, 5 young to be fledged from those 4 nests, so that now we're down to 2 chicks instead of 4 or 5. So that's a little bit lower than we'd expect, but 4 is a very small sample size, and these are scattered across such widely distant areas that there's nothing. That's just a random luck of the draw. Are there researchers, graduate students in ornithology or ethology, who use the footage from live cams as a source of primary data to study osprey behavior? I think somebody is doing that, and this is something that I've been preaching for quite a while as longtime followers of the cam and my sessions know. The osprey nest cams are providing all sorts of cool data that we're using. I recently revised the osprey account in the Cornell's Birds of North America project, and there were 3 or 4 little tidbits of information that are included in that report that are based on things that observations that the osprey cam community has made. So when I needed to know, for instance, when do osprey eggs hatch, I polled the community at this nest and one of the nests down in Long Island, and I got a list of exactly when each of the eggs, I think 12 eggs, had pipped. So that information is now part of the scientific knowledge base for ospreys. And I think there are some students who are using some of the behavioral stuff, and if there aren't, there will be soon. This is a really rich source of information that is available now and being tapped into by more and more scientists. We've seen osprey nests fail this year due to weather, as storms can prevent ospreys from being able to fish. Does their all-fish diet put them at an evolutionary disadvantage? Do they prey on other animals if they're unable to catch fish? So every evolutionary advantage or adaptation it entails giving up something. There's in evolution, we as in life, there's really no such thing as a free lunch. So when birds, for instance, when the birds evolved the ability to fly, they gave up using their forelimbs to manipulate food, to the most part. So when ospreys specialized on fish, they became very good at it. There are very few other raptors in the world that are as good at catching fish as ospreys, and only 1 or 2 are none are as reliant on fish as ospreys are. So becoming that specialized does indeed have its cost, but it takes it at the other hand, it provides a remarkably rich resource for the ospreys to raise their young. To some extent, there's an evolutionary disadvantage, but the advantage of opening up the resource of all those fish that are swimming around in huge schools of menhaden and alewives and herring that has opened up just a really rich resource for ospreys. Very rarely they'll take other kinds of animals. Sometimes those other animals are things that are in the water and are sort of acting like fish. I've heard about a nest up in Cayuga Lake in New York where there's a pair of ospreys that almost specializes on water snakes. And the neighboring pair rarely brings in any at all. And this one male just happens to really have a thing for water snakes. Sometimes they'll catch a muskrat or baby alligators, have been reported. Very rarely they'll bring in mammalian prey, but probably 99.99% of their prey are fish or things like fish. Here's a real general question. When do ospreys chicks fledge? About 8 weeks. I think this nest at 55 to 60 days is the range for which the ospreys at Hog Island have made their first flights. How well can ospreys see at night? We've pretty much covered that. We know they can, and in some cases they can see well enough to even catch fish at night. What's the bald spot on Bailey's breast? I haven't seen it very closely, but sometimes that usually involves some kind of a scar, so Bailey may have somehow been cut on her breast, and the feathers grow from follicles under the skin. So if Bailey got cut somehow, and I don't think it was might have been in the owl attack. I don't know whether that bald spot appeared before then, but so she basically had some kind of a scar on her in her skin, and that's messing up some of the feather follicles where those body feathers were coming out. There was a famous peregrine in Montreal that lived for about 19 years in an insurance company building, and she had a similar sort of spot on her breast, and you could tell it was her every year because this was before color banding. But it was easy to tell that it was the same bird coming back because she had that same spot on her chest. How do we tell the sex of the juvenile? This bird it's hard to do, virtually impossible to do by plumage. We had these birds in our hand, and by the time they're this big, their bodies are full grown. So all of their skeletons are full grown, and right now all Bailey is doing is growing the feathers in, growing her wing and tail feathers in. So she's as big as she's ever going to be in terms of her skeletal system. So one of the ways we can tell is when we band the birds, we can see how thick their leg is. Females are bigger than males in ospreys, significantly so. There might be some overlap with a real big male and a real small female, but there's little overlap. So we're basing it on weight and the size of the bird's leg when we had them in our hands. Are ospreys that nest along rivers more prone to starvation events for nestlings than those that nest along lakes, ponds, coastlines, inlets, etc., as happened with the Hellgate nest in Montana and others along the Clark Fork River? Prolonged rainy weather made for difficult fishing conditions for several days and resulted in nest failures. Hard to say. That seems like a logical conclusion. Most ospreys, even with those nesting along rivers, will have some alternate fishing spots. So the birds that are hunting along the coast are often hunting inland and not feeding as much offshore as we suspect they might have been. So that's hard to say, but it's likely to happen. What does Steve do all day? Mostly fish. When he's not fishing, he's probably just sitting on a perch preening and resting up for the next fishing bout. He's got he doesn't have so many fish to bring in now, but when he was feeding 3 or 4 young, that's a lot of work, and as we know, males do most of the fishing. This is an unusual nest in the amount of fish that Rachel catches, and this is partly why they're more successful. And these birds, when they've lost young, it's been due to circumstances beyond their control. Most young ospreys that don't make it are because the parents aren't bringing in enough food, and there are some nests where females do almost no hunting at all, and there are others where the females do a lot of hunting. One of my graduate students studied nestling mortality, and she was looking at sibling aggression and how that related to the success of nests. And one of the things she observed in her study was that the nests where females hunted were more successful than the nests where the males did all of the hunting. Why doesn't Bailey practice flapping and hopping like juvenile eagles do? She's just not at that stage yet. That'll happen pretty soon. Here's a question from one of the volunteers for our Martha's Vineyard Osprey surveys, who was assigned to watch a pole with a nest, and for the past 2 years they have made their nest bigger and bigger but have no offspring. I've seen the male bring fish to the nest for the female. Is it possible the nest is too deep for the offspring to thrive? I can't see into it. Now that wouldn't happen. The nests keep getting built up. They can get taller and taller, especially with birds that have where the male is really, I call them Home Depot birds, when some males really seem to like to bring nest material in. And there's some nests where the males are sort of like me. They'll bring about 3 sticks in and say, okay, honey, the nest is ready. So the nest in question here is clearly one where we've got a male who, and probably a female too, are bringing in a lot of nest material. But just the way you can see the nest here at Hog Island, they keep bringing in nest material, and right now they're at the stage where we sort of say they're putting the baby gate up, and as the young are beginning to wander around the nest, it seems that the adults will build up a rim of sticks around the nest, and we've even seen the young ospreys in the nest will actually trim their own nests, and that's something that we never knew happened until the advent of nest cam. So what will happen next here in this nest is once Bailey gets big enough that, and it's really she's at that stage now, the adults will stop bringing in so many sticks, and they'll keep bringing in seaweed and moss, and so the bowl of the nest will fill up, and by the time Bailey's about to fledge, the nest will be pretty much flat straight across. So the next year when they build a rim of sticks up, the whole nest keeps building. It doesn't get deeper and deeper. When the young birds learn to fly, will they return to the nest for a period of time until they find a place of their own? And will they stay in touch with their parents for a time? So what will happen when Bailey starts flying is that she will go out and wander around her home range, and she'll explore the world, begin to try to catch fish. Typically they're sort of starting to catch fish after about a week to 10 days, and typically they're not very good at it at first. So the parents will keep feeding them. The young will keep coming back to the nest. I say it's sort of like the fridge for ospreys, for teenage ospreys. They keep coming back to the nest in areas where there are a lot of osprey young. Young from different nests will often just hang out, will stop in, visit other nests. So the young keep coming back to the nest. The male keeps bringing food. The female will feed them for a while. Then she'll take off for South America, and the male will sort of be on duty. Typically the males leave in the first 2 weeks of September, and that's about when the young leave as well, although sometimes the young will linger on well into the fall before they start migrating. We had a young bird last year that we tagged in Newfoundland who got to Maine and stayed in Maine until November 7th or 8th, I think, before he finally started migrating. And I had a bird from Martha's Vineyard who wandered all the way from Martha's Vineyard All right, we seem to be back. Oh, and where were we? All right, so we were talking about young staying in touch with their parents at the nest. They hang around the nest until they're really ready to hunt on their own. Dad will leave early September, and then that's hard to say. It may be a kind of a signal. There may be some physiological change that takes place. That's a question that I really am going to wave the white flag on, and I don't have an answer to that, and I don't know if anybody does. In some birds, it may be considered a way for adults to identify a bird as a young. We think that the reason that young raptors have a different plumage from adults is that it's basically a free pass, like a hall pass. So if they're moving through a territory, adult raptors in the territory will see a juvenile and not see it as a real threat, so they can let the young bird go through the territory. If they saw a bird in their territory with a full adult plumage, then they know that was a threat, somebody that they'd want to chase out of their territory. That doesn't make sense as an excuse for the change in eye color, because if an osprey isn't going to get close enough to a juvenile to have to use the orange eye color as a cue as to whether that's a juvenile or an adult.